All right, this is the third canto of Dante's Inferno. And in this one, we're actually making the entry into the Inferno itself, into hell. So what I'm going to do is give a little summary of the canto, and then we'll go into the reading and then the discussion thereafter. So at the end of Canto 2, Dante had said that he was of one mind with Virgil, and that he was going to follow him no matter what he said. And he gets over his initial reservations, and they travel on together. Well, now as they approach the gate of hell, he reads the sign that's listed above it, which says that through me is the way to the city dolent. This is the city of grief, the city of sorrow, the eternal grief, and through me the way among the people lost. It also says that justice incited my sublime creator, created me, divine omnipotence, and the highest wisdom and the primal love. So at the top of it gives a little explanation as far as where this comes from, and we'll talk more about it later. But it's saying that this is justice and its omnipotence and its wisdom and love. So we'll get to those things later. And then it says the famous line, to abandon all hope, ye who enter. And these words, Dante to quell again. And so he has to be again unctioned on by Virgil, who tells him that there's no room for cowardice here. You've got to leave that stuff behind. And of course you can also hear the screams coming from the gate, which are coming from the people in the vestibule. So they enter in, and this is the vestibule of hell. This is before the actual entry into the punishments of hell. And this is where the souls gathered across the first river, which is called the Acheron. So they enter into the vestibule, and Dante says that he sees more people than he ever even thought existed wandering around in here. And there's two different groups. There's the group that is waiting to cross the river. Charon, the boatman, comes and takes them across the Acheron. This is not the Styx, by the way, it comes up later. They're waiting to cross the Acheron, and then there's one group that can't be taken across, and these are those who essentially were lukewarm. They never stood for anything. They never really did very much bad. They never really did very much good. They kind of followed whatever and wherever. Who was most dominant, who was most attention-grabbing at a given time in their lives. And so what's happening is they're wandering around following a banner, and this banner is just leading them all throughout. In the same way that in life they followed people, they're following this banner. And they're being stung by hornets and tormented by flies, and there's worms and pus and all of those things, and their faces are stained with blood. So it's pretty horrifying. So they then move ahead to, Dante and Virgil move ahead to the river where Charon can take them across. And Charon sees them, and first he's shouting out at the souls generally, but then he notices Dante, who has a body. He's not a shade, he has a body. And he says, you who are still alive, you got to come here by a different road. This isn't how you do it. Virgil, as he has to do multiple times, then says, actually, we have a divine mission. You can't really say anything about it. And so he pulls Dante onto the boat. And then as all of these surroundings start to have an effect on him, Dante faints. And that ends the canto. And this is a typical ending for a canto. There's lots of fainting. We'll get to that in the future. But that's the basics of Canto 3. Now let's read it. Inferno, Canto 3. Through me the way is to the city dolent. Through me the way is to the eternal dole. Through me the way among the people lost. Justice incited my sublime creator, created me, divine omnipotence, the highest wisdom and the primal love. Before me there were no created things, only eterne, and I eternal last, all hope abandon ye who enter in. These words in somber color I beheld written upon the summit of a gate, whence their sense is, master, hard to me, and he to me is one experienced. Here all suspicion needs must be abandoned, all cowardice must needs be here extinct. We to the place have come, where I have told thee, Thou shalt behold the people dolorous, who have foregone the good of intellect. And after he had laid his hand on mine with joyful mien, whence I was comforted, he led me in among the secret things. Their sighs, complaints, ululations loud resounded through the air without a star, whence I at the beginning wept thereat. Languages diverse, horrible dialects, accents of anger and words of agony, and voices high and hoarse with sound of hands, made a tumult that goes whirling on forever in that air forever black, even as the sand doth when the whirlwind breathes. And I, who had my head with horror bound, said, Master, what is this now which I hear? Said, Master, what is this which now I hear? What folk is this, which seems by pain so vanquished? And he to me, this miserable mode, maintained the melancholy souls of those who live without an infamy or praise. Commingled are they with that caitiff choir of angels who have not rebellious been, nor faithful were to God, but were for self. The heavens expelled them, not to be less fair, nor them the nethermore abyss receives, for glory none the damned would have from them. And I, O Master, what so grievous is to these? What maketh them lament so sore? He answered, I will tell thee very briefly. These have no longer any hope of death, and this blind life of theirs is so debased. They envious are of every other fate. No fame of them the world permits to be. Misericord and justice both disdain them. Let us not speak of them, but look and pass. And I, which looked again, beheld a banner which, whirling round, ran on so rapidly that of all palls it seemed to me indignant. And after it there came so long a train of people that I ne'er would have believed that ever death so many had undone. When some among them I had recognized, I looked and beheld the shade of him who made through cowardice the great refusal. Forthwith I comprehended and was certain that this the sect was of the caitiff wretches, hateful to God and to his enemies. These miscreants, who never were alive, were naked, and were stung exceedingly by gadflies and by hornets that were there. These did their faces irrigate with blood, which with their tears commingled, at their feet by the disgusting worms was gathered up. And when to gazing farther I betook me, people I saw on a great river's bank, whence I said, Master, now vouchsafe to me, that I may know who these are, and what law makes them appear so ready to pass over, as I discern athwart the dusky light. And he to me, These things shall all be known to thee, as soon as we our footsteps stay upon the dismal shore of Acheron. Then with mine eyes ashamed and downward cast, fearing my words might irksome be to him, from speech refrained I, till we reached the river. And lo, towards us coming in a boat, an old man hoary with a hair of eld, crying, Woe unto you, ye souls depraved! Hope nevermore to look upon the heavens. I come to lead you to the other shore, to the eternal shades in heat and frost. And thou that yonder standest, living soul, withdraw thee from these people who are dead. But when he saw that I did not withdraw, he said, By other ways, by other ports, thou to the shore shalt come, not here for passage. A lighter vessel needs must carry thee. And unto him the guide, Vex thee not, Charon. It is so willed, there where is power to do that which is willed, and farther question not. Thereat were quieted the fleecy cheeks of him the ferryman of the livid fin, who round about his eyes had wheels of flame. But all those souls who weary were and naked, their color changed and gnashed their teeth together, as soon as they heard those cruel words. God they blasphemed, and their progenitors, the human race, the place, the time, the seed of their engendering and of their birth. Thereafter altogether they drew back, bitterly weeping to the accursed shore, which waiteth every man who fears not God. Charon, the demon with eyes of gleed, beckoning to them, collects them all together, beats with his oar whoever lags behind. As in the autumn time, the leaves fall off, first one, and then another, till the branch unto the earth surrenders all its spoils. In similar wise, the evil seed of Adam throw themselves from that margin one by one, at signals as a bird unto its lure. So they depart across the dusky wave, and ere upon the other side they land, again on this side a new troop assembles. My son, the courteous master, said to me, all those who perish in the wrath of God here meet together out of every land, and ready are they to pass o'er the river, because celestial justice spurs them on, so that their fear is turned into desire. This way there never passes a good soul, and hence if Charon doth complain of thee, well mayest thou know now what his speech imports. This being finished, all the dusk champagne trembled so violently that of that terror the recollection bathes me still with sweat. The land of tears gave forth a blast of wind, and fulminated a vermilion light, which overmastered me in every sense, and as a man whom sleep hath seized, I fell. Okay, so for some of the devotional reflection to be had here, this is where things start to really get heavy. In the story of the Inferno, in the writing of the Inferno, because we start to see the first elements of brutality, and we start to ask the first questions that undergird this entire poem, which is, what is the nature of sin? What is it that it does to us? And hell is a reflection of the nature of sin in Dante's view. So that opening sign, this is the city of grief, the eternal grief, the way among the people, through me the way among the people lost. Which, if we're looking at in a simpler translation, I can go to something like Mark Musa. I am the way to a forsaken race. There's a separation here, and the separation is talked about as a proximity. As we get on to Paradiso, and we go through Purgatorio, the rising into the proximity of God is the way in which blessedness and happiness is achieved. And so the greater the distance from, the more severe that seems to be. And so the furthest away that one can get from God, since God is in the heavens, and the earth is, rotating in reference to the heavens, the furthest one can be is at the center of the earth. And that's where we're going to find that the Inferno is leading us. We're taken into this vestibule, and then the further down we go, the more distant we are from the divine. And this makes perfect sense if you start to put together the other elements Dante is laying down, such as hell was created by divine omnipotence, its justice and its wisdom and its love. And all of these things lead one to think that the way Dante is viewing hell as a state of being, this is not so much that God designs punishments and then enacts them upon people in consequence for the things they did in life. It's rather that the things that a person does in life creates the reality that exists for them in hell. And we'll see how this manifests a little bit later in this canto. I think there's a hint that shows this to be the case, although it's open to interpretation, as many things in here are going to be. So anyway, he reads this sign, and he says that it's hard for him. Just reading the sign, reading the description is hard for me, just as it is for us, I think, if we read this sign and we try to think about how the Inferno could be a product of love. That's difficult to discern, and that's the reason why the need for the journey is here. And Virgil then, like a father, again, he chastises him for his squeamishness and for his cowardice. And so he tells him he's going to have to move on. Thou shalt behold the people dolorous, the people of grief, who have foregone the good of intellect, which we're Virgil's position as the intellectual here and the means by which intellect can lead us to virtue shows that his prescription, his diagnosis of people are their absence of intellect, which plays a role in their lack of virtue. And after he laid his hand on mine, with joyful mien whence I was comforted, he led me in among the secret things. And there sighs, complaints, and ululations loud resounded through the air without a star, whence I at the beginning wept thereat. So he runs into this horrific element and, all these sounds of people crying out, resounding through the air without a star. It's just dark. It's a cavern. It's dark. Whence I at the beginning wept thereat. Languages diverse, horrible dialects, accents of anger, words of agony, and voices high and hoarse with sound of hands, made a tumult that goes whirling on, forever in that air, forever black, even as the sand doth when the whirlwind breathes. So a whirlwind blowing sand around, and all of these voices just kind of uttering into the cacophony. And of course, these are people from every race, and so they're all brought together, and the languages are diverse. One note that I found, I'm using multiple books for notes and commentary here. This one's by Robin Kirkpatrick. Mentioned that there's an element of Babel here, the Tower of Babel. Our inability to coexist and to build relationships because we're separated from each other by language, and this confusion, as it's called in Genesis, causes, even if you're side by side with them, you're still 1,000 miles apart. So there can be no community in this context because of the language. I thought that was an interesting note. I haven't seen that mentioned other places, but that's an interesting way to connect it to Babel. And so Dante asks Virgil about these characters. Who are these ones who are wandering around inside of this vestibule? And these are the ones who were not rebellious, but they also weren't faithful. Heaven expelled them not to be less fair. So they don't have grace, because again, grace is not an earned thing. Grace is given. All one has to do is humble themselves and to request and be on the receiving end of grace. And nor faithful were to God, but were for self. And in this, they follow around a banner. And Mark Musa, whose notes I'm also using for Inferno, he seems to think that this is them doing what they did not do in life, which is to follow a leader, to actually follow something. I actually feel like it's, in all the ways that Musa knows 1,000 times more than I do about this, I thought that this was a continuation of what they were doing, of continuing to follow whatever banner was in front of them, not really caring, not really noting what it was. So in this case, I take this to be a bit more like the notion that sin crafts a reality around us. The contrapasso is oftentimes not the opposite. It's a continuation of the sin, because the sin crafts the reality around the person who is condemned. Just like in the story of the prodigal son, his life becomes consumption, and then he ends up in a pigsty. There's a continuation of our punishment based upon the world that we craft around ourselves. And again, we'll see a hint of that a little bit later. So I think that's a good... Well, I like my version, I'm going to say, is that it's a caution about following whatever seems convenient. Every time I read this, I think about Hamilton, the musical, because in that, Aaron Burr is crafted as a character who waits to see what direction the wind is blowing, and then he goes that way so that he can't end up on the wrong side of history. And so he doesn't stand for anything. And so I think about him every time I look at this. And within this, Dante recognizes people, and this begins kind of a theme that we see of him recognizing characters as he goes through. And he sees one who, through cowardice, made the great refusal. And there's lots of theories about who this is referring to, most of which are cultural to Italy. at the time of Dante. The one that I like because I can resonate with it is Pontius Pilate. The idea that, and this comes from Musa, who I just badmouthed, but Pontius Pilate he stood in between the crowd and Christ, and he never really made a stand. He tried a little bit, but didn't quite make a stand. Whether or not that's fair is up for debate. Whether or not that is what's actually meant by Dante is certainly up for debate. But this great refusal, that refusal to actually render a verdict, but just to offer Christ up to others, it's hard to imagine a greater refusal than that, in the very least, considering that that's the most important character with whom one can interact. And of course, Pilate's relationship to Christ, his brief relationship to Christ that we see in Scripture, is so filled with irony because he asks Christ, what is truth? And it was the guy standing in front of him. I can't get enough of that. That has nothing to do with this canto. I just can't. I think about that all the time. So then, there came so long a train of people that ne'er would I have believed that ever death so many had undone. It's hard to believe that many humans have ever even died. That's how big the crowd is. That's a great description. When some of them I recognized, he saw the shade of him who made the great refusal. These miscreants who never were alive, and that's an incredible thing right there. They never truly lived because they did not actually stand for anything. They didn't make a choice. We are given agency. We're given the ability by God to make choices, and essentially they made no choice. They simply lived in the middle of everything. And so neither can they descend down into an appropriate punishment, but also they're not welcomed by grace because they never accepted grace. Gadflies, they were naked. This gets mentioned a few times. All the shades that we encounter here are naked with rare exceptions. They were stung exceedingly by gadflies and by hornets that were there. These did their faces irrigate with blood. This is one place where sometimes the Longfellow translation fails me a little bit. This is a place where it does extremely well. Their faces irrigated with blood, and it calls to mind the crown of thorns. The idea of the wounds across the head and the bleeding over the face. It calls that to mind. Which with their tears commingled, streaming down, at their feet by the disgusting worms were gathered up. This is the first real element of brutal suffering that we recognize. And it takes this physical form that's really visceral and memorable. And again, the hint is here that this is the reality. When we sin and then we face no consequences in life, like it mentions in Proverbs, is the wicked prosper, and it's bewildering. That really is an illusion. The reality of sin is brutal suffering for the person who commits the sins. And here is where justice prevails. This is where reality comes into its full being, where that a person is actually reaping the things that they sowed. There's this interesting moment too where Dante sees the people on the riverbank, and he asks Virgil about them, and he said, "Master, now vouchsafe to me that I may know who these are and what law makes them appear so ready to pass over, as I discern athwart the dusky light." Why are all these people who are not those who are parading around, but why are all these the second group of souls, pressing towards the river to cross over? Don't they realize that hell is on the other side? And Virgil responds with, "You'll find out in a minute." And this embarrasses Dante, which I think is a remarkably human moment to be found right here at the beginning, where this is your hero and your mentor, and in this case, your father, your leader. You ask a question, and it's not the right time for that question, and so you feel foolish, especially because he's already been, to use Southern terminology, he's been fussed at by Virgil because he was cowardly. He's been fussed at twice now for being cowardly, and we're only in the third canto. So then they see Charon coming up, and he has wheels of flame around his eyes. If that's literal or it's metaphorical, either way, it's fantastic to think of something being that intimidating. And he sees all these souls, and he cries out to them and calls them depraved. Hope never more to look upon the heavens. I come to lead you to the other shore, to the eternal shades in heat and frost. And thou that yonder standest, living soul, he notices Dante here, withdraw from these people who are dead. But when he saw that I did not withdraw, Dante just stands there. He's probably looking to Virgil for whether or not to move. He said, you'll come here by other ways, and a lighter vessel needs must carry thee. He has physical weight. Dante has physical weight. If the boat is too heavy, he would sink the boat. That's the notion given. That clearly turns out not to be the case once he gets on the boat. So probably being a bit metaphorical there. And this is when Virgil responds with, don't worry, Charon. It is so willed. There where is power to do that which is willed. Don't ask any more questions. And that quieted the fleecy cheeks of him, the ferryman of the livid fin, who round about his eyes had wheels of flame. So all these souls then start gnashing their teeth together as soon as they heard these cruel words, and they blaspheme God and their ancestors, the human race, the place, the time, the seed of their engendering and of their birth. They blame everything else. And this is where you see some of that continuation. There's a lot of souls who, throughout Dante's interviews within the various levels of hell, they are continuing to protest their innocence, that they don't deserve this, that it was someone else's fault. And that is a common theme throughout. And Dante struggles with even his compassion there of not trusting divine justice, but rather trusting in his own perception, his own compassion, even though empathy can very easily lead us to a kind of compassion that exceeds justice and that exceeds good mercy and is not logically consistent. And Virgil would stop him from this because if, I've used the example before, if you walk out and you see someone robbing a bank and they have come out of the bank that they've just robbed and they're struggling mightily to carry the bags of money. If I was moved to compassion to help them, run and grab the door and open it to help them load their car, I would have been moved with compassion, but I would not have been logical. Because if I had seen the people inside the building who had been terrorized, I would have been moved to compassion for them. So compassion itself does not serve as the correct barometer. I should probably just say metric, the correct metric of how we should behave. Compassion can be oriented based upon emotions if it lacks intellectual intervention. So logic has to enter into the process for us to exercise compassion properly. And Dante struggles with that because he hears these stories of it wasn't us, it was someone else. And he feels compassion even though he should be trusting in the justice that has already been meted out. God, the perfect judge, has already made the call. So they all these souls start heading towards Charon. And this is where Virgil gives us a little bit of hint about the nature of sin. My son, the courteous master said to me, all those who perish in the wrath of God here meet together out of every land. And ready are they to pass o'er the river because celestial justice spurs them on, so that their fear is turned into desire. This way there never passes a good soul, and hence if Charon doth complain of thee, well mayest thou know now what his speech imports. So Charon is not wanting him to go across, in part because divine justice is not spurring him to go across. He has a special mission, one that's set out and an exception to the rule, where he has to go down and learn the nature of sin. But the divine justice that spurs them on and turns their fear into desire. This, I think, is the continuation of their vices, the habits that they have made, which have led them into sinful behavior. Even when they reach the edge of the river and punishment is on the other side, because what is on the other side is a continuation of their sinful nature, a continuation of the person and the reality that they have fostered and created and cultivated within themselves, they are driven towards that punishment because the punishment is the sin itself. The sin is the punishment. They're synonymous with each other. And so if they were driven towards the sin in life by their desires, the desire will continue to carry them over the river into the most horrible place that they do not want to go. This is how the sign at the beginning of the canto helps us understand this statement as we get further on. It's crafted by justice and omnipotence and wisdom and love. And there's a bigger question about that last part, about love, that we have to ask. Is it better to exist than not to exist? This is something that seems to be open for debate in the modern world, that existence itself could be less valuable if enough suffering is placed upon it. It's better to be annihilated, to cease to exist at all. But in this case, love seems to hold us into existence, because existence, even in suffering, is better than not existing. And that can be a difficult one to grapple with, especially because that is not uniformly held as a concept. But as soon as we do start to say suffering is worse than non-existence, then we start having to mark out the places where suffering would exceed the goodness of existence, and coping with the idea of self-destruction, self-annihilation. You would have to start marking lines in the sand of where that occurs. It seems beyond human capacity to do this. The land of tears gave forth a blast of wind and fulminated a vermilion light which overmastered me in every sense, and as a man whom sleep hath seized, I fell. He's seen too much already, and he passes out. That's Canto 3.